Miller Ad Agency is our guest supplier today. We are ready to get underway. Doug, go ahead and kick it off.
Well, thank you, David. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I'm Doug Austin, founder and CEO of Strategic Source. This innovative supplier webinar series started about a year ago, May. And what our objective is to introduce suppliers that we think have an innovative product offering, are competitive, and they can help organizations in one of three areas, either in an expense category, an audit and recovery category, or potentially a new revenue category as well. We bring suppliers in here on a number of different topics. We haven't done an advertising or marketing related topic now since late last fall. So, but we know that costs are a concern in dealerships today and businesses in general. And we know that, trying to maximize your ROI, minimize your expense, and maximizing your ROI is certainly a topic of interest. So we are very pleased today to have the Miller Ad Agency team on, and they will be talking about how to do just that, how to maximize your ROI with data-driven solutions. So with that, thank you again for attending. We'll wrap up at the end, and I'll be chatting with you again at that point. But for now, I'll turn it over to the Miller team.
Thanks, Doug. Hi, I'm Kirk Woldridge, and I'm VP of Account Service here at Miller Agency, and appreciate Strategic Source inviting us to this webinar. I also have with me Rob Subner. You can see his mug off to the right. And Rob's been with us and has 15 years automotive experience, worked with the Park Place Group, and so has quite a bit of automotive experience. We also have Jenny Halamuda, 20, almost coming up on a silver anniversary, 25 years next week. And she has been instrumental working with not only Tier 3, but Tier 2 groups, a lot of Chevrolet, a lot of Ford. She works in the Texas office area as well as I do. And we both did a lot of Tier 2 back in the day with the Chevrolet dealer groups, Austin, New Orleans, Atlanta. And currently we are working mostly with Tier 3, Sampac Auto Group, and those groups. These are the things that you will learn today. See, yes, we are very research-based in our attempts to look at all the advertising. And so the first thing that we do is develop a very data-driven advertising plan, and we'll show you how to do that, as well as compile that information, and especially on the sales and the competitive side, competitive sales, but also competitive spending, how to translate that data into media plans and creative, how to create a list of KPIs to measure that. There's so much information out there now. We help you optimize and maximize those results. And then finally, how to audit it to make sure that your media partners are delivering what they say they're going to deliver, what the agencies deliver what they say they're going to deliver. And we'll just wrap up with that. So yeah, we've been in business for 40 years, over 40 years now. Like I said, we have some definite automotive experience, Capital Chevrolet, the Sampac dealer group, as well as 5-Star Subaru, some stores in South Texas, Bravo Autos, and then Don Hewlett. You may know some of these. And that's just a small list of quite a few dealers that we work with. Things we look to solve when we're attacking a advertising campaign is we know that this is an expense. We understand that it's probably one of your largest expenses, and we help to increase the understanding of what your ROI is, and that can be through lead submissions and bringing down your overall cost for leads. Bringing in quality leads as well. And both of those is all really about just gaining that market share. And the information that you need to gather and analyze will really help you calculate and allocate your budget, which vehicles you should be focusing on. This has been a big change in the last year with new to used. And then the right messaging to that right audience. Creative is a huge part of who to target properly, so that pickup truck buyer is definitely going to be a different buyer than a small car or SUV. And then we will measure those results so that we can optimize. We're constantly evaluating. So with all that information that's out there, we came up with a 4-point process called RACE. And it's an acronym. It stands for research, analyze, create, and execute. We've also added another E for evaluate, because not only should you execute it, but you have to reevaluate constantly. And so we're going to walk you through a quick understanding of what it takes to get to that point. So the beginning, researching. There's so much information. We compile that sales data, the share, your market penetration, competitive ad spend, we talked about that, your demographics, and then your positioning. That can be positioning on where people are spending their money, but also creatively. After we research all that, we start to analyze it. And I'm getting a little lag here. Hold on.
Well, can we close out of the poll, Kirk? Can you close out of that? And then I'll take over.
I thought we did close out.
Yeah, we are closed out. Jenny, if you could just X out on that poll
Great.
slide, and then you're good.
Okay. Perfect. It's giving me.
Yeah, I'm just seeing research up there. And it won't let me. All right, do you have control, Jenny? There you go. You got control. Or someone
Great.
just.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So to kind of jump in.
If you click on your screen, Jenny, that should activate your keyboard and mouse.
There you go.
Perfect. All right. Let's leave those up and we'll kind of go through this. So Kirk started there with the elements of research. And, the overall thing that I kind of want to share is, especially when you're coming to us through Strategic Source, the idea that they have is to come in and find areas of opportunity where you might be duplicating a business or overspending in some area so they can find solutions for you. So we really kind of had the same philosophy in the beginning. When we come in, obviously our number one philosophy is to increase your sales and to grow your percentage of market share. But there are ways to do that without just the old school of let's throw money at the problem to fix it, right? So a lot of this research was born from and coming up with a plan, what was being spent and how can it be better spent. So with that, when we look at the research, whether it's your sales information, your zip codes, we also treat the majority of your main competitors the same way, where we see what they're doing as well, because we're always looking for your opportunities to kind of take over. I always get a little nerdy here and it starts to sound like I'm playing Risk or Battleship for that matter, but where I kind of am looking for places where we can go after a weaker competitor or the strongest competitor where they're dominating and what you can take from them. So that's where the research and the analyzing come through really together. Once we start seeing information, it leads you down a path of what you should look at next. And do I need to pull up this competitor that I thought was a sleepy competitor and turns out they're actually into my business? Also, as Kirk mentioned with the competitive spending. So that is some key information because I'm always looking for ways to give clients a unique positioning statement, both in their creative, but also in where they're advertising. So sometimes there might be the number one TV station in your market or the number one radio station for that matter, and everybody's on it. So then you're just one of 12 when we can maybe find the number 2 or the number 3 and give you a dominant position there. So that's what the competitive spin can really help you find. Also the customer demographics, obviously. And a lot of this too comes into working together with each other. So when I find information about I'll use OTT as an example, that shows me a lot of good heat map areas of where you're getting your prime viewership from. Why wouldn't I use that data to help build a better TV buy? So a lot of this is kind of fluid, if you will. It's good to come in with a main plan, put it together, create that media plan, but also create the creative, and then you're constantly, it's really more about the evaluation. So when you see some things start to improve, how can I make that even better? Or if there's something that's not reacting the way I wanted to because I went after one zip code, let's say, that I really thought I could grow in, I might need to change that because I haven't seen growth in that area. So it's really a constant re-race program. Some of the research we use, some you'll be familiar with, some maybe not so much, but obviously bulk sales and then using some of the ComScore, which is a little bit more about marketing the TV ratings and the TV and radio as well. And then using Experience, getting some market information, Gartner research. So pulling it all together. It's not just about what you're doing and how your sales are, all that's very important. It's about what your competitors are doing and what's going on in the environment around you. So we'll start with sales history. We like to look at this by month in my model for the past 3 years. Now let's just start. I promise I won't say this 100 times, but this is something we still do. We look at the past 3 years. I recently put a plan together for a dealership, and I went back as far as 6 years because I'm trying to look pre-pandemic and what the history really was, where the growth was that they were missing then, that maybe they've even forgotten that was a problem because of the unique situation. So it's definitely been a unique way to go back and take a look and go a little bit farther back just to get a true history. Because obviously looking at the past 3 years, that completely changed the landscape. So keeping that in mind and keeping that in mind when you're making your planning, because obviously it's a lot harder to predict the future now than it was 3 years ago. Competitor sales history, like I mentioned, I want to know yours, but I want to know the opportunities around you. So I want to see where they've had spikes and where they've had problems. So where are their opportunities in both ways? Like you guys all were interested in with the zip code analysis. This is key, especially in keeping your costs down, because when it comes to whether it's a traditional side like cable TV or if it's your digital video such as OTT or YouTube buys, some of your geofencing, a lot of your digital could come into play. The way that you can keep your budget in check is to be very smart about where you're targeting. So that's where that zip code analysis comes in. To play it in a big way. Obviously, keeping an eye on the regional and national figures, what's going on. You'll see some of the research we have in a little bit that kind of shows how you compare to the area. And then used car sales by month and what's selling. So this is information that we share as far as I love to share it with the used car manager and the person who's buying the vehicles when they're going to auction or what have you, because I want to make sure that they are also communicating with me what they've got coming in, so we know what to market, but also that they're stocking the right information. And then where are you overperforming? So your market demographics. Okay, your city and neighborhood. This is just your general information, which one of the slides you'll see in a little bit can show how important it is to keep looking at that. How in a very short span of time things can change from the ethnicity, the lifestyle, where maybe this was the country 2 years ago and suddenly it's a booming new area of your market. So you really need to change your zip code targeting and also how you're speaking to those people in the area. As a reminder, I'm located in Texas and heavily in Central Texas. So obviously our Hispanic population has exploded, and it's been very important and part of our marketing plan and all of our research. Keeping up with the manufacturer demographics by model. Where did they've spent a lot of money on doing that research as well. So using that information and then marrying that with your local information. And which models must best match your customer needs. So for my client in West Virginia, obviously it's going to look a lot different than it is in Austin, Texas. Like my focus on ethnicity and also on which vehicles. Obviously she sells some trucks. But not quite as many as they do in Texas. So things like that will change what you need to focus on and where your opportunities are. So then we go into the analyzing of that data. And this is really where I put my glasses on and become a little bit of a nerd, because it's exciting to find areas where I can maybe turn off the spigot on something else and then really go heavy after some true opportunities. Really get into targeting that customer and the geography, which vehicles I'm going to focus on, from as broad scale as if I'm putting a retail offer into my messaging, I want to make sure I'm not retailing one that I want to sell, but one that I know is going to sell. So some of the sales analysis that we do, what are your top 3 best-selling vehicles? It's one of the big secrets that if you don't know it already, just because you got, and once again, things are a little different right now. So if you've got a huge shipment of something in, yeah, I would absolutely have you talk about it right now and spread the word. But in normal times, if you get the 10th best-selling vehicle and you get 10 of them in, that's something that I'm not going to have you put together a big marketing plan for. Those you're going to have to sell. I'm still going to want you to push the big sellers, the top 3 that gross for you and that also move volume for you. And usually those do line up with the best-selling vehicles in your market. Not always. And when they don't, that's when we know that we need to change our plan of attack. And then, of course, keeping an eye on used cars. And what I will say, and Rob will probably get into this a little bit too, is there was an older school method of giving a certain amount of dollars allocated to your new car versus your used car. In my current planning with my clients, we are at an even pace because the volume, in order to keep up with the volume, we've got to sell the used cars and we need to promote those as well. So for right now, a lot of my budgets are built based on equal dollar amounts per goal total car sales, new and used, where when things get back to a little bit better of an inventory situation, hopefully end of the year, fourth quarter, then I plan to shift those budget plans back towards a little bit heftier on the new car side versus used. Always keeping an eye on monthly trends. So when we put together this race package, we can put together a here you go, here's what we recommend for you, put it with a bow. And I've done that before where we put the big proposal together and said, good luck, have fun, go for it. But it's also something we do for our clients all the time. We do keep an eye on monthly trends. It's a really good idea to kind of put together a quarter. So a lot of the times you'll see us when we're going through things, we do look year over year, but for the most part, we're looking kind of quarter over quarter to get a better idea compared to the previous year or even compared to that previous quarter where we're seeing changes. So that helps you pick out where are your best 3 months, where do we need to be prepared, know your history, and lean into those. And then does that line up with national? Does that line up when you're nationally seeing and some regionally? And if there's times when you're under what's going on in the nation, is that a product of your location or is that a product of something that you could maybe pick up on? Does it coordinate with sales events? Is it always truck month is the real question. Just kidding. But that's kind of something to look at is, are you really seeing a spike when you're seeing some spending from your manufacturer, some actual promotion that's going on to heavy up in your area? And if you're seeing a dip when they're spending that money, are you relying too much on them? Do you need to stay strong with yours? Or do you necessarily need to tie in with what they're doing if you're having strong consistency without their extra spend? And then the zip code analysis. So kind of want to, I'm trying to kind of go through these quickly because I've got some actual figures in here. And of course, it's going to be like, looking at pictures of your grandchild because they're not, or somebody else's grandchild because they're not your numbers, but you'll kind of get an idea once you get a feel of what we do with our clients on a monthly, quarterly basis where we see trends going. So we do look at the top 10 zip codes in your area, sometimes top 20, depending on the size of the dealership. Where are the main sales coming from, both in English and Spanish sometimes? Who are the main competitors in those zip codes? And how much percentage should you have? What is your goal percentage? And then how does that compare with your overall market share and how your competitors are doing? Once again, so you're seeing a lot of repeat information here. What are those models that are selling in each zip code? So you might have a goal of really, I'll speak to one client just kind of in general forms, but there is anticipation of a new point coming into the market eventually. So we are keeping an eye on not only our area of responsibility, but on that upcoming area of responsibility. If I've already got ownership there, because I'm doing a job of selling into that market where there's not a current dealership, I think that's going to be a good case for me to get a new point in that area. So that's where there's an opportunity of not just what's selling best in your zip codes, but also in some zip codes that you're focusing on. Also, are you speaking to that zip code with the right creative? If you've been used to a more of a white collar customer base, and some of the areas that you're starting to add or focus on are definitely more of a blue collar, then you should probably change not only possibly your messaging, but definitely the medium that you are speaking to them in, whether that's English versus Spanish, or if that's a particular news program in the morning where maybe you used to have always done the number one news station, but actually the number 3, which is a lot better cost, is going to get you who you're looking for. So this is where we start to find wait, I can find a way to get this done for you on a better budget than what you're possibly spending, but then also gather and get some more eyeballs that you haven't had before. I always start with a broad scale of my research, for whether that's usually the bulk numbers that come in, and then that always leads me to other questions. So if I have opportunity to use a dealer's cross-sell reports, this is huge to take advantage of, right? Because you can kind of go in there and manipulate everything that you're thinking about. So if I see something happening and I want to ask deeper questions, then I can dig into a particular zip code, to a particular competitor, and see what the real story is behind the top level numbers. Also, your dealership database, right? This is the gold that you already own. How much of it is repeat referral? Do we need to keep that in mind, whether it's in an email or a digital campaign? Do you have accurate emails? This is a huge, we recommend to all of our clients to go in and have that cleanup done. It's something that's super important, and to stay on top of it, because that's your goal. If you've had them there as a client, then they're going to come back in and buy again, and you want to keep it that way, and then their family members, and so on and so on. Keeping an eye on the equity situation of your vehicle. Obviously, this is really traditionally came in when it came to mail, but there are so many other ways to use this information when you're putting together both your media plan and your creative. If I'm speaking to people that are not in positive equity situations, then I'm going to target my creative a little bit different to go after that. So here's a little bit of an eye chart, but I'm going to kind of lead you through just to give you an idea of how we start to look at this. So just as an example, this goes from April of 2020 through March of 2021, comparing it to the following year. So same time period, just 2 different years. So this particular dealership we're looking at is a Chevy Buick dealership. And so now I want to start looking at what's going on in my market, and where do the opportunities lie. So while I look down, I'm going to go straight to the Hispanic, African American, and Asian. So the percent of the dealer registrations, and then more importantly, is the manufacturer. So where I'm looking at the right, I'm under what the manufacturer is doing to sell to Hispanics these vehicles in the market. So there's my huge opportunity. I'm actually doing better with the Asian market, a little bit flat with the African American market. So one of my big focuses here, obviously, is already jumping off the page. And then, of course, I look down, and not surprisingly, Chevy Silverado being the number 1 new car sales between this time period in my area. And then not surprisingly, too, just kind of like looking at the areas where these are coming from. But I also care about 2, 3, and 4, and these top models that I really need to look into. And then Buick even sneaking in there with the Envision. So then I start to take it a little bit deeper to where I look at competitive dealerships in the market. What do their current registrations look like? And then obviously just everyone's down, right? It's the inventory situation. So now we're comparing to how far down are you compared to the other dealerships in the area. Have you taken advantage and made the most of what's out there? Are you following along? So for this particular dealership, they're gray on the top, on the left-hand side of this line graph, is where they had been with a very kind of up and down. situation with their registrations. And then you'll see with the green for that time period where they started out strong and then they had a real dip and they knew it was time to kind of change something and make an adjustment. So where you start to see things go back up in the right direction. And where those sales are, where we're focused on, where they're coming from. Are there opportunities in some of these areas where I know there's a lot more sales coming out of a certain area and know that there's opportunity there. And taking it down deeper within that area, just overall, I mean, this is really where you just kind of start to get the idea. And yes, of course, trucks are number one, but what is my gap? What is my difference that I'm doing compared to the DMA? So what I want to see is that here's a good one. For example, let's go down to the quarter ton. Compared to the rest of the market, I'm doing okay. So this is not something I should be concerned about. When I go up here, yes, I have opportunity in truck, but where I really see opportunity is the upper mid-size utility, right? Because my gap from what's going on in the market is larger than any of the others. So I start to see and build the picture. So then I can go down a little bit further into those actual models and see more specifically where I've had some growth, which, and I'll give some credit to Buick and transitioning some of their vehicle looks and marketing for that matter. But so I've had some percent growth in the Buick side, and I've closed some gaps on the higher end SUV. But once again, it's the mid-size, upper to mid-size SUVs kind of crossover is where my opportunity is the strongest, where they're being sold in the market, but not necessarily by this dealership. And you start to see the picture form, right? So same thing here, where I'm taking a look at both my males and my females. I'm doing a good job, really, in selling to females. Males are my opportunity. I'm doing a good job now with Hispanic sales, but compared to the market, I could be doing better. It's still my growth opportunity. This particular dealership has always had a strong presence in the older category. So youth has always been kind of an opportunity for them, which comes into mind when I put the creative together, right? So when I put together creative, I'm not necessarily speaking to this age group because I've got a little bit of a lock on that. I want to talk to this age group. And then is it just my creative or is it where I'm advertising? Maybe that number one news station in the market isn't the way to talk to the 25 to 34-year-old, which is why for this particular dealership, we added on the emerging, the OTTs and the YouTube marketing to get in front of that age group. So you start to see the plan build from all of this information that you see. Like I mentioned before, just kind of looking at this historically, this is Austin, the Hispanic population. And, we're going to go back to 1960, right? So the left-hand side gray is your Anglo population and your blue is your Hispanic, which in the 60s, Hispanic and Asian right there fighting at 10%. And then obviously the blue line has been the one to show steady growth. And currently through 2020, you're almost even here, right? So if you haven't been speaking to the Hispanic community, you've not been speaking to the majority of your audience and your customers. This is the most obvious chart that I would say to change up your advertising plan and maybe pull back on some of your Anglo spending with your English language advertising and ramp up your Hispanic advertising. But does that necessarily matter for me? Do I need to look at, obviously with those kind of numbers, it matters for everyone in the market. But when you see numbers like that, I want to make sure that I am in that area. If I was a dealership over here in the far east side of the market, I might not have to spend that kind of money on Hispanic advertising. But when I get into we'll call this the Navy zones on the I-35 corridor down Texas, absolutely, which is where most of the Chevy dealerships are located, and Austin is right there on the I-35 corridor. But they should absolutely all be speaking to the Hispanic community in order to grow their business and maintain. So then here I start to do it a little bit more than just, okay, yes, it's in my area, but where? Putting a big advertising budget together, we're always thinking, how can I do this more cost effectively, right? So I'm not going to just say, give me all your money so I can put together a Hispanic advertising plan. where are my biggest opportunities that not only tie in with my sales as a dealership, but also with the top Hispanic sales. Some of those are going to be a little bit farther away. So for this particular dealership, we actually went headfirst into the Hispanic advertising, and we went to the top 20 zip codes for Hispanic sales. And we started that back in October. So then after the first quarter, we looked again at those zip codes. Did we have, of course we had growth in the zip codes in our area, but then we looked at the other of the top 20, or the ones in the top 20 that not necessarily in our unique area of responsibility. And if we had growth of those, we kept that going. If we didn't, we turned that off and redirected or took some of that money away in order to not spend there. Because if it wasn't pulling after 3 months or after 6 months, then let's turn that money off and let's not spend it there, or spend it more effectively somewhere else. And then just kind of keeping an eye too on how we're doing compared to our competitive stores in the area, where they were with the market for their total market, the percentage wise, where they are with the Hispanic change, and then where how that changed year over year. So this particular dealership has seen an absolute growth. There was a very strong dealership in the market before, and that is kind of where the guns have been pointed to really work on taking some of that business back, but also making sure if it's new business in the market that they come to us. That's where the age numbers kind of tie in. And then, like I mentioned, used cars, and I'll kind of just pick out some highlights of this, but similar information. But I want to keep an eye on what's selling. Now, we all know, I mean, the main thing is if you're a Chevy dealer, you're going to sell more used Chevrolets, and as you should, right? So it's just because, let's say, Ford F-Series is the number 4 seller, right, in your area. That doesn't mean you should run out and stock Ford F-Series. Have some on hand if you can. Definitely take them in on trade, but don't try to be something that you're not. This is when we start to look at the competitors' used sales a lot closer, though, because if they're selling a strong amount of off-brand makes in their used car lot, then we know that gives us a little bit of a guide on what we should be stocking as well. So I also want to kind of point out this top right-hand side. Not surprisingly, your CarMax, your Carvanas are some of your top dealers. I want to keep an eye on the other dealerships that are doing a good job in used cars. Really take a look at how they're promoting and what they've got their lot stocked with. And then this was interesting to me, just as a fun fact. I saw this Porsche Austin, and it started to make my research analyzed brain really go to work, because that's interesting to me. Never seen them on a report before. And then, what I found out after digging and digging is that basically all of the luxury dealerships are owned by the same group, and they're submitting under one name. So then they're showing up higher. So it wasn't something that I necessarily needed to go out and stock Porsches and really go after them particularly. And that helps to find, even though I had an idea of why that was happening, finding out that information and knowing not to suddenly change my plan and start stocking luxury cars, that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. I found out some other information just by doing that research and getting in there, and I saved going in and saying, let's stock all the used luxury cars and really promote those. We're going to leave that to the other 8 dealerships that are putting that number together to make that look a little bit bigger. And then just kind of keeping an eye too on where those dealerships and the used car dealers, where they were, how they had been doing before. Obviously, this has all been growth compared to the previous year, now this one right now, we're just looking at Q1 of 2021 compared to Q1 of 2022, just to give it a little bit more concise information. But this dealership also knew that this became, Hispanic was a number 1 focus for this dealership. Used cars was number 2, quickly behind, because we wanted to be able to continue to have the revenue come in order to keep on this track as we waited for new inventory to come in. Similar things that you're seeing too, usually you will see this kind of line up with what's going on in the new market as far as new sales. That usually does line up. Sometimes you see different opportunities. The main thing to point out is, once again, the compact and kind of your upper mid-size utility. There's your opportunity. Now, if I go down here and look at compact cars per se, I could see that and go, gosh, I'm not doing a very good job in that area. But then I can also go back and see that Toyota is the number 3 of the dealership groups that really do a good job in the used car business. So am I going to put together money to really go after that? Or am I going to go after where I know my bread and butter is in the truck business, sport utility business? Because then while I see opportunity in compact cars, it's not necessarily the opportunity in the Chevy business per se. So there's sometimes where you see opportunity, but you don't want to go in and attack it instantly because there's lower hanging fruit to really grow your business. Some information. So same thing on this. Now, it's a little bit different with the opportunity on the used car side. They're actually, compared to the market, once again, still doing good on the higher end customer, the higher income, the older customer. So you're seeing that 25 to 34, but also that mid-range, 45 to 54, where we had a little bit of a better grasp on that on new cars, not so much on used. These numbers up considerably because of the inventory situation. So keeping that in mind when we're putting together our used car marketing plan. Just some little bits and pieces that jump out for putting that together. So putting a little bit of a bow on the analyze, right? So I'm going to also come in with the competitive spending. For this particular dealership, shockingly, there was opportunity in Hispanic. So there was a way to kind of achieve a presence in that market without going out and per se buying the market. I really want to look at the digital side and finding as much research as I can there to see what my competitive dealers are doing, utilizing geofencing, utilizing the targeting. I think that is kind of the key thing that I would never recommend to come out and just buy the market, especially anything that can be zip code modified. I mean, if you take anything away from this, you guys all mentioned that you're paying to your zip codes. Use that to your advantage. That's where we really go in, because I don't want to tell you to spend this certain budget when I can do it for half the price and still get the same kind of results. Some other unique ways of looking at your competitive spend in the market. You might have a dealership that owns the 5 o'clock news, and so there's no point in going in and buying that expensive real estate, right? But maybe they're not buying the 10 o'clock news, which has almost as good of ratings, or are there certain ways to make it look like you own a specific day part, only being on heavy 3 days a week? So there are creative ways to go in and put a budget together that doesn't just spend all the money in the bank, but where it looks like you want to do that. So that's when we really get into with our media team. And with the local, we really believe in buying locally because your local media reps give so much information and can really share with you because they want to see you succeed as well. What Google AdWords have you been buying, and what are your competitors buying? Where can some opportunities for money savings come in there? Do your competitors have a seasonality in their spending? Because that's another way. You're always looking to zig with the zag, which is why you want to completely evaluate all the time, because you want to make sure I see a window here, I'm going to jump in on this window. And then if I see someone else coming in and they're always spending a ton in October, I might back off a little bit in October and try to maintain, right? So just always looking for that opportunity to keep budget in a very level playing field. Also, keeping an eye on your creative. One of my favorites, client I picked up almost 20 years ago, and there was no one in that market doing the crazy car screamer ad, and everybody kind of looked the same. So instead of trying to copy and paste, I wouldn't necessarily say it fit the overall of the dealership. It definitely fit one of the managers. Putting together that creative, and suddenly they launched. They were number 5 in the market, and they ended that year number 1 and really never looked back. Just kind of finding some different retail positioning. And if there is something that where you've got somebody who does the dealer on camera, or you've got animation, is there another way? Is there a local talent that you can use, or a national talent, or something, a jingle, for example? If nobody else has a jingle, that could be your opportunity to stand out and be different. We're always making sure that you have some kind of unique positioning statement, not only in your retail messaging, but also in your creative. Do you already have a brand? It's been very rare that I've come into a new client and said, let's start over, right? I go in and say, what do you have that's working for you? Maybe that needs a little bit of a tweak. Maybe your name is great, but your logo looks like it's from the 70s. Let's keep the same identity, but bring it up into modern times and give it a little refresher. And then you're not paying for a whole new big branding and the full packaging. You're just giving some updates there. So that's the usual case, is like you're not coming in and starting all over. You're taking advantage of what you've already built and then making that work better for you. Some of the ideas that we kind of go for is, are you the number one dealer in your town, in the state, in a region? Do you want to give away oil changes for life with a lifetime warranty? What is already out in the market? Once again, see the pattern here. What's already been out there? If you've got the guy in the market who's already saying at lowest price guarantee, or I'll just give it to you, then there's no reason to come in behind with that same messaging, right? So let's find something else. One of the trends that I'm seeing right now with what's going on is promising to never be above MSRP, because that's definitely not the case. Now, we've also seen some people and recommended that maybe you take that to a safer level, because the market has been so unpredictable, maybe not on all things, but maybe on your number one selling. If Silverados, if that's the one thing we promise to always stay at MSRP or below, great. You're not committed to all of the cars on your lot. So just looking for unique ways to have you stand out and be the selected place to come and buy a car. I think that is where I pass over to next. Yes. Turn my camera, hand it over to you, Rob.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate it.
Certainly.
So I realize, guys, there's been a ton of data to get through, and it's a little mind-numbing at times, but I think you probably got a good takeaway from that there's really all that research that's available out there. There's a ton of data that can help you make smarter marketing decisions and really just spend your money the most efficient way possible, which is, what we propose, what Strategic Source is all about, is just really spending efficiently against a finely tuned and identified market where we think and you will have the best chance of success. So we got to talk about, all these things that you're learning, basically what models, what vehicles, what audience, what do you need to know to really break through based on what's selling best in your market, where the best opportunities are, and how you can succeed by spending most efficiently and driving the greatest ROI. So really, it comes down to, when you start to take all that analysis, all the research, you want to translate that into a set of clearly actionable goals that you can build your plan against. So we talked a lot about vehicle sales, and obviously everyone says, well, just increasing your number of sales is the obvious thing, but how do you do that smartly? Increasing sales in specific segments that have shown to be the most profitable or have the greatest opportunity for growth. Growing market share. We talked a lot about zip codes, and what zip codes you have the opportunity to increase some penetration there to gain more than your fair share. And also say, I think dealers are often tempted to really want to go after competitors' areas because they feel like they can, undersell them or whatever the opportunity. But I would say always encourage you to really focus on the zips and your AOI first. Just from a logistical standpoint, these are people who are closest to you. It's generally easier to get those people to come to you than trying to pull someone out of someone else's market. Then also, as you kind of think about the importance of building your pre-owned inventory now, if you know you need to acquire some vehicles, doing some smart marketing against those vehicle types or vehicle segments to get them into your dealership for an opportunity to trade them in to one of your models, while at the same time growing some inventory of those models that you need is important. Looking at web metrics as another big thing to evaluate your sales. Obviously, you want to increase web traffic overall, but I also encourage you to really look at engagement metrics on your website. So the number of BDP views, the number of pages per session, the amount of time that your shoppers are spending on your site. The better those are, it shows that you're really driving engaged traffic there that is spending time on your site and they're really shopping through your vehicles. Bounce rate is another good thing to look at. If your bounce rate is high, it means that people are landing on your page and then quickly bouncing right back off. So you want to make sure that the bounce rate is low and that the engagement metrics are high. And also looking at the overall conversion of your website. Do you know what that is? Of the number of visitors that come to visit your website every day, what percentage of those turn into a phone call or a form fill? And there's a lot of things you can do to improve the performance of your website to make sure that all the traffic you're driving there is converting as a high percentage as possible. So think about this acronym SMART as you put your goals together: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So just to say, I want to increase my sales next year. Okay, be specific. I want to increase my sales of full-size pickups by 20% in the next quarter. So just, again, the more specific that you can be and the more relevant, and put a specific time frame around that. This is really all about accountability for yourselves, for your marketing partners, for your internet sales team. Having these goals clearly identified, making sure that they are measurable and also realistic. Kind of just knowing, as Jenny pointed out, you have a pretty good sense of, you've done the analysis of what kind of sales you've achieved over a specific period of time. So knowing that the growth metrics that you've outlined for yourself are within reach and achievable will just make the accountability that much more relevant. Then we want to put all this into a budget. So you've done the research, you've identified your goals, then how do you assign your budget against those goals so that you're advertising as efficiently as possible? As Jenny also mentioned, there's typically been, it's just, well, how many cars do we want to sell times an allocation, advertising allocation per unit to come out of a budget. We've kind of, typically you spend a little more on pre-owned because that's a lot of where your lead provider expense goes to. It's a little, you spend a little more money to get people to drive eyeballs to your pre-owned vehicles. So just be mindful of what you're willing to pay on a new and a pre-owned basis to generate advertising revenue. And this is a big one, utilizing manufacturer co-op funds. I bet a lot of you guys have a pretty good stash of co-op money sitting unspent in an account somewhere. Is someone at your dealership keeping track on that? Do they know how much money you earn based on the number of vehicles that you're wholesaling? And do you know exactly what you can spend that manufacturer co-op money on? There's very clear guidelines that each of the manufacturers provide. It's typically focused on new cars. Sometimes they will allow you to spend that on certified pre-owned during sales events. But leverage that money, because that is free money to you guys to use to increase the impact of your overall marketing plan and having the manufacturer pay for it. Also know what's going on a tier 2 level. So, one of the strategies that I was using when I was marketing director for a dealership group is let the manufacturers, kind of provide air cover in your market. They will have the budget to come in and run the expensive media like TV and radio in your market. So they get the awareness for you, the brands you carry high. It is then your responsibility for taking advantage of that interest that they're generating and driving people to your dealership, typically more through digital tactics. So you're going after people who you are shown to be in market, and you can reach them. So again, kind of knowing what your competitor is doing, what models they're supporting. When they're running truck month, you can kind of dial back on your dealership level truck spending, let the manufacturer do the heavy lifting, and just kind of focus your dollars more tactically. And again, just make sure your budget is aligning on your goals. So if you are focusing on a specific model, a specific target audience, a specific segment, make sure your budget is aligned with the goals you want to achieve. And then as you think about how do I spend my money, there's a lot of options. And no true rule of thumb here between broadcast, digital events, and sponsorships. Typically, for a dealership, I would say start with digital, reach those low funnel shoppers. The advantages of digital, it's the most efficient media you can generally buy. It's the most trackable and targetable. So you can really kind of focus in on specific zip codes, neighborhoods, whatnot, to make sure your dollars are working as hard as possible. And then use broadcast where possible for really some brand building and awareness. Some of you guys come from big dealership groups where there's a dealership brand name that resonates in the market. So make sure you're running some broadcasts just to keep the awareness of your dealer name out there really top of mind, so that when people do come across your digital, they're already predisposed to who you are, what your dealership is all about. And it just generally makes your digital work that much harder when it's running in conjunction with some good brand building awareness advertising. So this is a total eye chart, I realize, but what I want you to take away from this is what an overall annual plan will look like. And I just really want you to see the level of detail that it goes into. So this kind of breaks out
we across the top, we know how many units we are projected to sell. And then we go and then have the, accountability to measure, all right, how many did we actually sell for each month? Are we tracking to our objectives, or do we need to make some optimizations along the way? You want to make sure that you're covering not only what are traditional advertising expenses like TV and radio, but also think about including some of your third-party lead providers in here if you're not already. Your Auto Traders, Cars.com, Car Gurus. Those are typically all part of your marketing expense, and you want to kind of track that all to make sure that you are driving efficient ROI with all components of your media mix. And again, tracking it this way, having an annual plan allows you to sort of go into the market strategically throughout the year. You're not being reactive to what's going on. You have a proactive plan that you can put in place all year. Know that, if you kind of do buy your media up front, most media, will allow you to cancel or reschedule with 2 weeks notice. So you get better rates by planning up front, but you still have the flexibility to be nimble if you need to reallocate budget along the way. Then evaluating goals is really critical. So go back to the SMART goals that you use to create a set of key performance indicators that you want to measure. Sales and share data you can typically get from your manufacturer or media partners. All those charts that Jenny showed you, the majority of those came from media partners that she spends with in the market. There is a partnership there that you can really leverage, that they're happy to provide you with all kinds of insightful sales and share information that you can use to make smarter decisions moving forward. We talked about cross-sell reports. That is really a key piece of information your manufacturer provides to see how you're performing in your key performing in your key AOI zips, where your competitors might be edging in on you and where you need to put your focus. And then Google Analytics, make sure you've got good access into that. Someone at your dealership is able to go in and measure your web traffic, not only your traffic overall, but your sources of traffic. Is the advertising you're doing actually driving good qualified traffic to your site? Google Analytics will give you a lot of that. And then integrating lead data from your third-party lead providers, making sure you've got real careful analytics around that so you know specifically how many leads they're providing. But as we'll get into a minute, how well are they performing? Attribution tracking is something that is relatively new, and this is a really interesting way to sort of prove out the effectiveness of broadcast advertising. A lot of times people will say you don't really know if your TV commercials or your radio ads are working unless someone happens to come into the dealership and say, hey, I saw your commercial. But there is technology out there now where your media partners can put a tracking pixel on your website, and then they can measure lift in web traffic based on a 15-minute increment from when a commercial runs. So this, for example, is looking at a radio buy. So we are able to kind of go in and, we've kind of gone in and taken a baseline measure of web traffic. So we know that for any sort of day or time period, what is the typical amount of traffic that your website generates? Then we go in, and after the audience has been exposed to a commercial, we are able to measure incremental lift, or how many extra people came to visit your website that we can attribute at least somewhat to being exposed to your media message. So what's kind of interesting on this chart is it really kind of helps. This first one just shows we had 6 different creative units that ran on the same station. So of that, we can see, and it kind of tells you, the number of airings and the number of visits attributed to each piece of creative, and from there we can get, what are the average number of visits per airing. So this was able to kind of help us hone in of all the creative we were running, which piece of creative is driving the most visits. So again, this is all about driving efficiency with what you're doing.
Rob, unfortunately, we are 3 minutes to top of the hour here.
Yep.
So I'm gonna ask you to wrap it up, and then so that David and I can and for all the listeners out there and attendees, we can get a copy of this presentation to you. But summarize in the next 30 seconds, if you would, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess bottom line, there's a ton of data out there that you can use to track the effectiveness of your advertising. Just make sure that you guys are doing it. Or is your sales department, following up on all the leads you're doing? Because this is really where the rubber hits the road, is how well your internet team is able to capture the efficacy of your leads. So,
look at number of leads
Each salesperson is getting what's
their
their
closing percentage. What is the closing percentage of each of your providers? You know, typically your website will always be your number one source of leads, but how does that compare to your auto traders, your cars.com, whatnot? I don't know if it's because we've reached the end. I can't advance my. Oh, there we go. All right. So just making sure you're tracking all that and looking at your lead
response time. Your goal should be 5 minutes or less, making sure you've got good escalation policies in place so that if leads are coming in and they're not answered initially, that there's a process that a sales manager or internet sales manager or floor manager is alerted and can follow up. All right.
All right. To the Miller Ad Agency team, Jenny, Kirk, and Rob, we really thank you today. I really appreciate your approach. Very metric-driven, KPI-driven. We use the same format, SMART objectives over here, so we align pretty well. Really appreciate the presentation. For all the listeners and attendees today, we can make a copy of this presentation available to you. Just simply, and David, can you advance the slide to that? Text us at 612-386-3898, and we will get a copy of the presentation to you. If you're interested in help with your expenses in general, Strategic Source is here to help you. We will have a copy of this, so just reach out to us at sales@strategicsource.com. We'd be happy to talk to you. We will have a copy of this webinar up on our website probably by tomorrow. And again, if anybody's interested in a copy of this is packed with information. We'd be happy to get a copy off to you and put you in touch with the Miller Ad Agency. So Miller team, thank you very much. You did an outstanding job. I appreciate it. And I'll turn it over to Dave.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we did bring up the post-session survey that people can give their answers to 2 quick questions. We love to have your feedback after spending an hour with us. Otherwise, have a great rest of the week, everyone. And we look forward to you joining us on future webinars with Strategic Source.